News.
Let's go to Canberra now. Joining us is Liberal MP and Victorian Dr Katie Allen. Katie, good to see you. Thanks for joining us this morning. So how confident are you that Victoria can get on top of this latest outbreak?
Look, there's no doubt that the Victorian State Government had problems last year. I understand they've taken steps to try to rectify that, but we are watching very closely to make sure that contact tracing is of top quality, because at the end of the day, mistakes can happen, but if you don't have the proper defences through contact tracing, that's when we get into trouble. So let's watch very closely to see how they step up to this. But of course, Victorians need to go out and if you have symptoms, get tested. If you've been in contact with anyone with COVID, get tested. And of course, if you're eligible, get vaccinated.
Has your confidence about Victoria's contact tracers improved, or is it still at a level that isn't perhaps where it should be?
Well, we know that the previous Chief Scientific Officer, Professor Alan Finkel, went along with the team from Victoria to New South Wales. We know that the New South Wales State Government, Gladys Berejiklian, has been the best example of how to do contact tracing. So we know that the Victorian Government has looked to New South Wales to learn how to do it. Let's just see how that set of defences has been activated and whether we're going to get there.
Is it a concern for you that if numbers grow today, that that border shutdown might emerge?
I don't think anyone wants to see border shut down. I'm really keen to see that the contact tracing works. I've always been a supporter of hotspot lockdown. We know that this is in the north of Melbourne. We know that we can see the government finally is publishing sites of where the contacts have been, and that's been happening in New South Wales for a long time now. So that's a new and welcome, event where we're now seeing where people have been. That's been happening for the last few months, but that's the way to do it, is make sure that people know where this contact has been, so that people can take steps to go and get tested if they've been to those places themselves.
Is this another reminder too, Katie, that the vaccination rate isn't where it should be?
Well, there's no doubt that we've had supply issues. There are issues that are outside our control as a country. We know that vaccines overseas have been needed. I think, the death rate overseas has been unbelievable, and Europe has been holding on to its own supply for its own needs. That being said, supply here in Australia has been activated from many months ago, because the Minister for Health, Greg Hunt, knew that we needed sovereign supply, and we now see the supply coming through and matching the demand. But we need to make sure that we keep our foot on the accelerator with regards to the vaccination program. And I'm very pleased coming into winter that we've got more supply flowing, and we can see Australians stepping up, putting their shoulder forward to vaccinate, because that's what we need to do to keep individuals safe, but also to help keep Australia safe.
What about these comments from Paul Kelly yesterday for incentives to be provided so that people do take up the vaccine? I mean, it's essentially a bribe to get people to take the vaccine. Do you back that?
Well, at the end of the day, we know some people are very keen to get vaccinated and they're lining up and getting their appointments and getting their jabs. But we know there's always going to be some vaccine hesitancy. We're in a great position here in Australia. These vaccines are new, so people are saying, well, let's wait and see, whether we're going to step up. And it's these outbreaks that are occurring in Victoria that remind us that we can't be complacent. Vaccine hesitancy, in some ways, is an Australian privilege. But we can't, as we go into winter, be complacent about what COVID may or may not do on this continent. It's important that people step up when they're eligible to get the vaccine. And I'm very confident that as we go forward, that Australia has the right plan to keep Australians safe. And that includes things like good quarantining, top-class quarantining, more importantly, excellent contact tracing to make sure that the expected errors that can occur in quarantining are mopped up. And then, of course, the public coming with the government with regards to doing what they need to do, which is either get tested, do the right thing with regards to public health measures as they're being rolled out and recommended by the authorities, and then, of course, vaccinating when that is required and when you are eligible.
But could incentives work?
I think incentives are something that's required for those last few that perhaps are more hesitant. People want to know what's in it for them. So if we can actually align incentives with what makes people realise what the benefit is for them, because at the end of the day, vaccination is always going to be a risk-benefit equation, and people look at the risks and they look at the benefits. So incentivising can be helpful. We know that with regards to all vaccination programs, there have been incentives used for no jab, no play, no jab, no pay. So there are incentives that I think we should consider as a continent or as a country, and I think these are things that are helpful to make sure we get high vaccination rates.
But does that then show that the government's current advertising campaign is falling short, that it's not working?
Well, we know that our supply-demand curves are working at the moment. So as supply comes through, the demand is being met. We don't want to outstrip that supply side of things. So supply is stepping up very rapidly now. We had a record number of vaccinations last Friday of 100,000 in one day, which is fantastic. It means that the supply is coming through and that we know that Australians are stepping up. So at the moment we're in balance and I'm comfortable with where we are. But as we accelerate with supply, we want to accelerate with demand, and we will need to look at incentives as we look at vaccinating the whole country.
Okay, so what, go into a prize to win $1 million or a free hot dog or a free beer? Have you got a preference?
Well, I think there's a number of incentives that are being discussed, and one of those incentives I think the Prime Minister Scott Morrison is taking to National Cabinet this week, and that is about permit exemptions. If the states are going to continue to have outbreaks, particularly if they're outbreaks they cannot control and that they lead to lockdowns, I personally am not a big believer of state-based lockdowns. I believe that we should be having hotspot control, which is a much better and more simpler way to do it, but also helps with keeping the economy open, particularly in the regional areas. They often get very frustrated by state lockdowns, particularly border towns.
Yeah.
So I'm very keen to look at things like permit exemptions so that people can travel more easily if they have been fully vaccinated. Of course, that'll have to be matched with rapid antigen testing, such as lateral flow testing that's used in the UK. So there needs to be a formal discussion, a broader discussion about what permit exemptions would mean, so that people can more easily travel if they are vaccinated and they are antigen negative through rapid antigen testing.
But that could cause big traffic jams on roads, right? If police are there at borders and they've got to check everyone's permit or check everyone's passport or whatever it is, I mean, that would cause huge delays on roads, yeah?
Well, I think what you would do is you would have a simpler system that is online and making sure that people can actually, use a digital approach. Now, we did see big border, queues and all sorts of problems with lockdown. So my preference is not to have lockdown. So it goes back to quarantining, making sure that we have good contact tracing and not having lockdowns. But if the states unfortunately can't keep control, then we may find they activate lockdown. So this would be a great incentive if that indeed does happen. Now, let's just hope Australia never gets to that. But as we move forward, we need to have a conversation about how we open up, and continue our activity. And these sorts of conversations will need to happen as we open up next year our international borders. So good to test how these things may or may not work. We need to understand how they work and we need to test and trial them, because Australia is eventually going to open up to the rest of the world. We need to know how to do that safely and how to do that effectively.
Okay, Dr. Katie Allen, thanks for your time this morning. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much, Pete.
Well,